This is WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. You are listening to One Human Nation with your host, Sandy Batiste. This program will be talking about race and race relations in your community and nationally. Our goal is to be open, honest, and productive.
The viewpoints expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of WRUU, its license holder, or its staff. Once again, welcome to the One Human Nation Show. I'm your host, Sandy Batiste, and so I'm excited about kicking off today's show, as well as introducing to you a concept that I would like to try to implement in 2019 to allow you to give more feedback. And so one of the things that I posted as a question on the first show of the year last week was, if you are white, how would your life be different if you were born in this country as an African American? So if you're born in this country as an African American and you're white, how would your life be different if you were born as an African American? And then vice versa. If you are black and born in this country, how would your life have been different if you were born white? And I realized as I posted this, posed this question, there's really not a way for you to give feedback in a safe place, and in order to have honesty, you have to feel like, I'm safe in providing and sharing my opinion here. And as you, as you know, there's some crazy things that can happen. So there's two things, actually there's three things that I am looking to implement in 2019 to get your feedback. One is to have a segment on the show, on the live show, and it probably is going to be a 15-minute segment that you can call in to answer in what I'm looking to be as the question of the month, as I'm posing as the question of the month. Because I think if I try to do it as a question of the week, I don't know how it works in your world, but time goes by so fast. So it would be the question of the month, and it's posted on the Facebook page for the One Human Nation Show. But if you're not able to call in, and you would be given the number to call in here at the studio for the One Human Nation Show and what time. So I'm looking at the first probably 15 minutes of the top of the hour from 5 to 5:15, that you have that opportunity to respond to that question as we kick off the show. The other way you can respond is by sending your email response to onehumannation, WRUU@gmail.com, because the good thing about doing it via email is you may still be hesitant to come on radio because you don't want, and you don't have to provide your name. But if you've got a distinctive voice, somebody may recognize your voice, and you may just not want to be in that space. You want to be in a safe space. So if you email me, then I'm not going to be using your name. I am basically going to be sharing your response to whatever that question of the month is. So what I plan on doing, and the third option is going to be a private group on Facebook. Now, here's the thing I learned about private groups when I was, we were implementing the One Human Race in Austin. We cannot add someone, or I cannot add you to the private group if we're not friends already on Facebook. And I do not want to open up this whole, I'm friends with everybody on Facebook just to get you into the group. So you would have to email me at onehumannation, WRUU@gmail.com. You would have to email me to let me know you want to join the group. And here's where it gets tricky on Facebook. You have to provide your email address that you used at the time you joined Facebook. So if you email me and that email address is not the same email address that you used when you joined Facebook, In the body of the email, you would have to say, this is the email address you need to use that I used when I first opened my Facebook account, and give me that address, which gets a little complicated because some of us may not remember what that initial address was. I'm sure with Facebook, they consider it to be a safety issue, so they don't have people, trying to put you in groups and they don't have access to or your permission to do that. So I do want to get more engagement into what we need to do and what's going on in your world for undoing racism and how to take action in 2019, which we're going to talk about a little bit more. We ran out of time on last week's show, so I do want to get into that a little bit more on this show, and how for the people that are already doing this work, how do you see your role? And it's going to reference back to the article that I mentioned last week, entitled Saying Goodbye to 2018 Seesaw of Outrage and Numbness. And the author on that was Deepa Iyer. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but this was published December 30th, 2018. But we're going to get into more of the graphic that was posted on the One Human Nation Facebook page that was created by her. And so I want to make that clear that that's not something Sandy's come up with. It's something that we will be taking a little closer look at on this show. So the other thing that happened on last week's show that we want to finish up on this week's show is that we really didn't have time to listen to a video from a comedian. His name is Travis Jones. So he's using his platform on YouTube to talk about how to use your white privilege. And he also talks about if you're on the other side of the fence. Well, here's where this gets to be a little bit difficult, and this is why I want you to have the ability to share your story. It's very difficult for me as an African-American female to talk about how it is from the other side of the fence, whether that is, and sometimes the other side of the question may also be from a male perspective, or, a white perspective, or a Latino perspective. I can only speak my truth from an African-American perspective. And so this particular clip that he posted on December 4th, 2018, talks about the culture of whiteness and how it's been marked by a kind of silent seriousness. And how do you get past the shame or seclusion when it comes to issues of race and racism? And that there is a moral choice to become good white people or non-racist, or has come at the daily cost of colorblind racism. And so he goes on to talk about if we want a more free and just world, we must embrace Angela Davis's words, in a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. So how do you do that and still not, and not be identified as the bad people? And so we're going to start by taking a listen to this clip that is from Travis Jones. I also have a clip in talking about finding your voice and telling your story from someone that aired on the show when I was really just getting started with it back in April of 2017. So we're going to listen to a little bit of that story also, and then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to go into dealing more and taking a look more at the article that was written by Deepa Iyer, or Iyer, however it's pronounced, saying goodbye to 2018's seesaw of outrage and numbness. So let's start by listening to the clip from Travis.
Several years ago, I went to see comedian Kamau Bell perform, and as a part of his act, he did something like a racial roll call to get the crowd warmed up. So he started out and he said, "Any black people in the house tonight?" And there was clapping.
And I apologize for some of you folks. This is going to be a little bit of a repeat, but we didn't get through the whole clip. So the first part of this is going to be a little repetitive if you listen to last week's show or the recording. But when I listened to it again, there was just no way to jump in at a halfway point. So, sometimes repetition is not a bad thing.
Claps and cheers. And he said, if you're black in here tonight and you're proud, I want you to put your fist in the air and yell Black Power. And all the black people in attendance, with unison and with pride, they put their fists in the air and they yelled, Black Power. And then he said, what about Latinos? Any Latinos in the house? And there was claps and cheers. And he said, if you're Latino in here tonight and you're proud, put your fist in the air and yell, Latino Power. Same thing. All the Latinos in unison with pride, they put their fist in the air and yelled, Latino Power. And then Kamau said, any white people in the house tonight? And there was a few claps, and he said, if you're white in here tonight and you're proud, I want you to put your fist in the air and yell, White Power. And there was silence. Now, after a few seconds, there was laughter, but I'll never forget that silence. Because that choice that Kamau created in a matter of seconds, white people have been making for the last 60 years. To either be identified with racist white people who scream white power, or to be good white people and distance ourselves through silence. But that's a false moral choice. People are too messy and racism is too complex and the stakes are too high for such simplistic thinking. After the laughter died down, Kamau got serious for a second. He said something I'll never forget. He said, white people, you gotta find better ways to speak about being white in the world, or other white people are gonna speak up for you, and they may not be the people you want representing you in the world. So I want to speak to you today about two things: the kinds of white people that might be representing you in the world, and then inspiration to find your voice so that you can begin speaking back to them. I've spent big parts of my life letting other people do my thinking for me, but when I started rebelling against that silence by thinking for myself, I tapped into something powerful I was familiar with. You see, I've always been, or had a rebellious spirit. Growing up, I wasn't good at sports or academics or the arts. But for as long as I can remember, I was voted class clown. So I was great at challenging authority and asking questions when I wasn't supposed to, and I loved disrupting silent spaces with humor. And since I wasn't paying attention to the lesson of the class, I had lots of time to pay attention to the people in it. And I've been people watching ever since. And it's in that same spirit that I want to encourage you today to be good troublemakers in your thinking, or what I'm calling bad white people. Now, I know some of you might already be looking for the exits in the room with all this talk about white people. Because if I've learned anything over the years, there's one thing white people hate to be called more than a racist, and it's white people, yeah. Right? I was reminded of this recently. I was tweeting about how white people needed to get better at understanding racism when a white person tweeted me, "You're one to talk." And then she went all caps, so I knew I was in trouble. White boy? You see, I have broken the white code of silence on naming white people as also a racial group. I was being a bad white person. So let me be clear. Yes, I am a white boy. In fact, I'm what sociologists call a really white boy. I was born in an all-white dairy farming town in upstate New York, and I grew up in mostly white suburbs, schools, and churches up the road in Union County. I've had a mullet. I wear flip-flops in the winter. I play frisbee golf. And yes, I let dogs kiss me on the mouth. But when I talk about whiteness today, I don't just mean having white skin. I mean what James Baldwin meant when he said that our identities are like clothes that we wear to cover the nakedness of the self. You see, we don't just have races, we wear them to make sense of ourselves and the world. And like clothing, we sometimes grow accustomed to the fabric and we forget that we're wearing them. So if you're non-white here today, we need you too. Because more often than not, you can see how we're wearing our whiteness better than we can. So I want to encourage all of us today to wear our whiteness robes loosely so that we might see them and feel them for what they are, and ourselves for what we might become. Because as Baldwin says, it's trust in one's nakedness is all that gives one the power to change one's robes. Now, since we're being class clowns in our thinking, I want to use a typical classroom as a metaphor for looking at the robes of whiteness. And I want to encourage all of you to sit in the back of the room and be willing to look with new eyes. Be willing to challenge those voices speaking for you. And be looking for your own voice along the way. Now, the first characters you are familiar with, white bullies. Now, bullies wear their whiteness to try to cover their badness in the world, to try to make themselves feel better than others. They practice a more violent version of what comedians call punching down, taking the easy way out by attacking those below them, avoiding the hard work of finding themselves or punching up at the violence that produced them. You see, racism is ultimately a sickness of the soul. So white bullies from the KKK to internet trolls, they wear whiteness like a mask, hiding from themselves in order to hurt others. But not only do bullies attack easy targets, but they are triggered by those who threaten to expose their smallness in the world. Like many of you, I've been inspired by the protests we've seen around the world in recent years, and when I've spoken up about the love and the courage I saw in the faces of the protesters from our city, facing off with an army of police and soldiers armed with tear gas and guns and tanks, I had forgotten about the bully rule of punching down. But white people from my past quickly reminded me, confused and angry, that I would also be outraged at injustice and inspired by the protesters. You see, I was being a bad white person. And as a class clown, what always bothered me about bullies was that instead of dealing with their pain through friendship, they took it out on the rest of us. And it's the same with white bullies today. Their anger is real, it just isn't true. And they're mailing that anger in to the wrong address, and there's a multi-billion-dollar outrage industry on YouTube, talk radio, and political platforms waiting to cash in the checks of white anger. And this isn't new. In fact, white anger has been big business in America since our founding. It's what historians call the wages of whiteness, where working-class whites traded in their pain and anger for the temporary relief of feeling bigger than their black and brown neighbors. But it's bad business. Fear and anger are two of our most primal emotions, so we should guard them vigilantly. The fact that people are profiting off your pain without a peep about love or solidarity, that should raise some flags. In fact, if you want something to be angry about, there's a start. Now, because bullies have often worn their whiteness loudest in the world, they've often received the most attention, but it's really been white hall monitors, standing quietly in the front of the class, taking names who played the larger role in the history of whiteness. So whereas bullies wear whiteness to feel good, hall monitors wear whiteness to get goods. These are goods white people, but here goodness is not about the character of the person, but about making good deals. It's replacing the golden rule with the rule of gold, and the way you get goods as a hall monitor is not by being your brother's keeper, but by keeping your brother out. Whiteness here is worn like a stiff-collared shirt. President Eisenhower explained this. Speaking about white Southern parents during desegregation, he said, "These are not bad people. All they're concerned about is that their sweet little girls are not required to sit in school alongside some big black books." The emphasis there is not on the hatred of the black students, but on the goods for the sweet little girls. You see, when your goodness is confused with goods, your world becomes like a game of Monopoly, and your neighbor just another piece on the board. All space becomes your space, all time, your time, all goods, your goods. The hall monitor ethic says, we're going to destroy your neighborhood to build a highway through it, but not because we hate you, but because we love short commutes. Or we're going to give you subprime loans for your house, but not because we hate you, because we love high interest rates. Or we're going to build our own schools, taking the best teachers and resources, not because we hate your children, but because of our sweet little girls. And there's a common thread connecting hall monitors of the past saying you can't vote yet, get an education now, or eat in my restaurant, to the hall monitors of today, policing people walking down my streets, barbecuing in my park, kneeling during my anthem. This is not about hatred, it's about goods. As a class clown who largely saw school as a place to laugh and make friends, I couldn't stand hall monitors. I could handle bullies because at least I could understand them, but I could never understand the motivation of a kid turning a place of joy into a place of law and order. And the gag is, hall monitors police white people too. I've heard white hall monitors call poor and working class whites ignorant and lazy. Ironically, the same slurs bullies use for other races. Now, I come from working class people, who to this day are some of the smartest, hardest working people I know. So I was offended because, again, I realized I was a bad white person. This isn't new either. Historically, wealthy whites called groups like the Irish, Italians, or Scots dirty whites because they were too wild, they worked the wrong kinds of jobs, and they didn't have the right kinds of manners. Now, more often than not, dirty whites have tried to clean themselves up and behave for history's hall monitors. There's always been a thread of bad white people who've embraced the dirtiness of their struggle and joined their neighbors in solidarity. We should hold on to that thread, however tiny. As Southerners, we have an intimate relationship with the land, the dirt. In fact, when we want to talk about hard work, we even say things like, you got to roll your sleeves up and get your hands dirty. And man, I wish we had that energy for working against white supremacy in the world. Because for a people that love meritocracies, we have not been pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps in racial justice work. Now, by now you might be thinking, well, just like a classroom, aren't bullies and hall monitors in the minority? What about the majority of white people? What about the rest of the class? And I'm sure the majority of the white people you know are diversity-loving, inclusive people who stand against racism. And decades of survey data show us that racial attitudes of whites have improved over the years. The problem is racist policies have largely stayed the same, or in many cases gotten worse. We now have what sociologist Bonilla Silva describes as racism without racist. Well, how did we get here? During the civil rights era, white people saw ourselves in a mirror through the violent images we saw in the paper and on TV. We didn't like what we saw. So we distanced ourselves from those bad white people and created a culture where not seeing race became a way to be good in the world. And that's how we got the colorblind classroom. So whereas hall monitors wear whiteness to get goods, the colorblind classroom wears whiteness to be good. And we show our goodness as non-racist by blaming white bullies, closing our eyes to race, or by shrinking in shame or silence to show our agreement with its badness. Whiteness here is worn like a uniform. But our silent seriousness has meant that we don't have anything serious to say, even when we do want to speak about race. In 2006, for example, 100 middle-class white parents volunteered to be part of a study where they would talk to their children openly about race. And what's most interesting about that study is not the findings, but the fact that the study never happened. Only 6 out of the 100 parents were able to have open conversations with their children about race. The others either dropped out saying, I just couldn't bring myself to do it, or I didn't have the words, or if I did, I reverted back to colorblind language like we're all just the human race. As a class clown, what always bothered me about the silence of the classroom was that goodness was about conformity, replacing thinking for oneself with the approval of groupthink. And the problem with shame and colorblind goodness is that they are like emotional straitjackets, tying our hands and covering our mouths when it comes to race. The problem is we've been bad students of racism. Not only have we not done our homework, but we've been working on the wrong assignment, our goodness. Instead of listening and learning to the voices of those experiencing racism and then joining them in fighting it, we've been working on another project altogether. And I would know, because I've spent most of my life trying really hard to be a good white person. I love making people laugh, and I pride myself on having friends from all walks of life and from all around the world, but eventually I realized that my goodness made me feel good, but it wasn't doing much for making the world good. And my goodness felt lifeless in the face of mass incarceration and the racial wealth gap, immigrant rights and police brutality, and it feels lifeless now when I see the way that whiteness is killing white people too. Through the opioid epidemic, suicide rates, and white poverty, you see the goodness of non-racism is no match for the badness of racism. We are living through another mirror moment in history. Through the shrinking white population and the rise of social media, white people are looking at our robes of whiteness once again. And our closets are mostly full with the masks of bullies, the stiff shirts of hall monitors, or the uniforms of the colorblind classroom. So it's time we get some new clothes. Because we do not choose the skins we're born with, but we do choose how we'll wear them. I've been thinking a lot about the class clown as a metaphor for how can be better bad white people and turning a mirror back on the lies and stupidity of white supremacy in all its robes. You see, it wasn't until I started speaking up about injustice in the world that I became a bad white person. People love clowns that make them laugh. They kill clowns that make them think. But I've also thought about several teachers along the way during my class clown years who pulled me aside at the end of the year and they said, Travis, even though you disrupted class a lot, you also brought us a lot of joy. And that's a tension I'm still living with today, and one I want to encourage you to embrace. Find ways to bring joy to the world through your disobedience. Because I believe every one of us has a little spark of rebellion inside of us that gives us freedom to speak back to the world. And I know that there is comfort and security in hiding in the robes of whiteness, but there's greater freedom in throwing off those robes, robbing you of a voice in the world. So find your voice. Be rebellious. Be bad white people. Thank you.
Yes, if you've just tuned in, you're listening to the One Human Nation show, and we're going to take a couple of breaks here, but I do want you to hold on to the thought of, how do we think of people as good people and bad people? Because I see that a lot in the dynamics that go on in mainstream media, in some of the conversations that I see in the Facebook world. It's like if we are affiliated with one political group, we're considered good people, and then if you're affiliated with a different political group, you're considered bad people. And in some ways, we've got to get beyond that in order for us to have communication, in order for us to move towards becoming one human nation. And so we're going to take a couple of breaks, right? Well, one break right here to get in our some of our station identification and some more of the things that we need to take care of to continue to operate here at WRUU. So let's get started with that.
This is WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
This portion of WRUU Savannah Soundings programming is made possible by listeners like you and Brighter Day Natural Foods. Brighter Day is celebrating its 40th year serving the Savannah community with produce, vitamins, and supplements, and a deli and juice bar. Brighter Day is located at 1102 Bull Street at the south end of Forsyth Park. More information is available at 912-236-4703 or brighterdayfoods.com.
Savannah State University presents the 30th Annual Savannah Black Heritage Festival through February at various locations in Savannah. Highlights include Grand Festival Day at the Civic Center on February 9th, Songs of Freedom and Justice, the Future of Jazz Concert, the Cleo Parker Robinson Dance Ensemble, and many lectures and exhibits focused on Black history in Savannah. For more information, visit SavannahBlackHeritageFestival.org.
And if you're just tuning in, you're listening to WRUU.org or 107.5 FM. And I'm talking so I can get into another opportunity for you to participate with WRUU.
WRUU 107.5 FM is a new and different listener-supported and all-volunteer community radio station for Savannah. Our diverse broadcast and web programming is supported by generous listeners who value our passion and our spunk. We're independent of other media and receive no government or large corporate support. People like you are the largest and most important source of our funding. So go to WRUU.org to find out how you can make a one-time or monthly contribution.
So we're going to continue with our topic of discussion today, but I do want to point out to you, one segment that I will be introducing in 2019 is how you can engage, and right now I'm just calling it the question of the month. And so, like, for January, the question that I posed was, if you are white, how would your life be different if you were born in this country as an African American? And then vice versa, if you are black and born in this country, how would your life have been different if you were born white? And one of the things I realized in posing this question is that you need to have a platform and how you can respond in an environment that's safe, where you can be honest, you can be open, and we can have some honest feedback so we can move towards being one human nation. And I strongly believe that if we don't have a safe place to share our voice, it becomes very difficult. It becomes very difficult to share those stories. So, and for people to have different points of view, because so many times it breaks down into an argument. So the first thing you want to do is realize that the next week's show, I will be introducing, for the first 15 minutes, I'll give you the phone number that you can call in to the studio and answer this question. And I will post it again on the Facebook page for the One Human Nation show. And the other way that you can respond, and you want to write down this email address, is you can email your response to onehumannation, WRUU, @gmail.com. And in this way, if for some reason you don't want to, or if it's not convenient to call in during the live show time, which is from 5 to, like 5:55, then you have that opportunity that you can send in an email. I will also be creating a private group on Facebook, but here's what I've learned about Facebook and private groups. Unless you are friends with me on Facebook, I cannot add you to the private group. And so please don't send me a whole bunch of Facebook requests for friends, because I don't do that either. If I don't know you, I'm not going to accept your friend requests. So what you can still do is email me at onehumannation, WRUU, @gmail.com, and email me. And if for some reason your email address that you're emailing me from is different from the email address that you use to set up your Facebook account, in the message of that email, you're going to need to provide me, if you can remember, what your email address was when you joined Facebook. So sorry about that, but that's just the way it works on Facebook. So I can't just arbitrarily add people to the private group on Facebook, but that's going to be the other place that hopefully, as we grow the momentum of this segment, that more and more people will be comfortable in sharing their stories. And so the way this could work is you could say to somebody then at the appropriate time, or if the time presents itself, say, you know what, this is a good time for me to tell you about this particular show, and I'm able to, and anybody can respond in a safe environment to the questions that are posed. So that's kind of how, I'm going to be rolling into 2019, and it does play into, what are our roles going to be in 2019? Are we going to be in the safe place, or are we going to be more actively engaged? Which brings me to talking about this article, and you'll see the graphic that's posted there. So I'm going to just jump into this and talk about what I think is very interesting that this author of this article has written about. And, it's how do we get off this seesaw and actually practice principled actions under grim circumstances. So how can, this is her question, how can 2019 be a year of both risk-taking and visioning? And so what she breaks down, that if you're already engaged in this role of undoing racism or being active as an anti-racist, she breaks down what categories that you probably find yourself in. She breaks it down into healers. She says some of us are healers who tend to the intergenerational trauma of racism, colonialism, capitalism, patriarchy, and nativism. And then you may be a frontline responder. Again, this is according to the author of this article, who quickly and ably transition into rapid response mode, instinctively, and organize resources, networks, and messages. And I'm going to tell you, I saw a lot of that based on the groups that I was involved in and the people that I friended on Facebook, that people were actively engaged in Georgia as well as in other states in really being active against voter suppression. And so when you can engage and see that, it's very motivational. The other category, which I've met several people that are storytellers and artists, binding the past and the present, channeling the histories and experiences of our ancestors to shed light on what is possible today. And I've met some awesome storytellers and artists in Savannah and want to hopefully share more of their storytelling and artistry with you in 2019. Then you may fall into the category of bridge builders. So she goes on to say, some of us are natural bridge builders who can work across divisions with patience and compassion. And I kind of look at myself in the role of bridge builder. It does require you to be at a certain place in your journey and to have patience as well as compassion and to be open to all sides of the story. She goes on to explain that some of us are disruptors who speak up and take action, especially when it is uncomfortable and risky. And I can tell you that sometimes when I engage with disruptors, it's very uncomfortable for me. I don't know how it is for them, but it's uncomfortable for me, and that's something that I have to work on as part of my journey. And then she goes on to say that some of us are visionaries with the ability to find, articulate, and reconnect us to our North Star, even when we cannot see the sky. And she goes on to state, not all of us can or should play each of these roles. An effective movement ecosystem requires different actors to play certain roles, and that you might find ourselves falling into different roles depending on where we are, personal as well as external circumstances, or we might be observers and supporters from the side from time to time. So she poses these questions that I really want us to think about in 2019, these guiding questions to use, to reflect on in building your journey and the steps you're going to take along your journey towards social change and race reconciliation. So here we go. What role do I feel comfortable playing? What role or roles did I try out in 2018, and what lessons did I learn? Number 2 is, how can I stretch myself in 2019 and why? What are the injustices that keep me up at night, outrage me, and push me to act? Third question, what do I need to learn more about before I step in? Who can teach me how to do that? The next question, where can I take bolder risks, especially if I hold different forms of privilege? What support systems do I need to be able to take those risks? Next question, if I work in or adjacent to the nonprofit and movement ecosystems, how am I holding on to purpose, especially given the poles and contradictions of purity, having to prove that we belong in movement spaces. And I think this speaks to what was mentioned before in the clip we listened to. Are we afraid of being identified as a good person or a bad person, a troublemaker? Productivity, maintaining constant performance and output at the cost of overwork, replication, and low impact. Personality, pursuing relevance in celebrity activism and perfectionism, expecting to get it right all the time and being afraid to own up to our mistakes. So these are some of the questions she's posing, and I've got 3 more from her, and it's: who are the people I surround myself with, and what roles do they play? How can they hold me accountable in a compassionate way? How can I widen this community? The next question: when, and not if, but when I make mistakes, how do I acknowledge them and course correct without feeling like I failed? And the last question is: how do I move through different roles without feeling like I have to pick just one in order to be effective? At the same time, how can I make sure that I am not a wanderer or a short-term amateur? I love that. Or positioning myself as an expert within a silo. And so I think that's a good starting point as we kick off 2019, as we look at what are our roles and how can we be more engaged in 2019. And that's what really prompted me to say, okay, what can I do more of as part of using the platform of a radio show on a wonderful community radio station like WRUU to bring to light some of the questions that are posed, and how can people engage and answer those questions. So it's something to think about, and I do want to, and I know we're not going to be able to listen to all of these clips just because of the time constraint. So I do want to play just a little bit of a clip from someone that I interviewed really at the beginning stages of the One Human Nation show back in 2017, April of 2017. And it's a person that I have great respect for and connected with during my time in Austin. And we still engage because I still work in a support role on some administrative initiatives or items with this particular initiative, the One Human Race Initiative. So let's take a listen to what this person is talking about in their personal journey, and just being very open about that and very honest about how that journey in what and how that took place, and really understanding or beginning to learn about racism in this country. Process, because this is where we have to look internally at those dark places. And I'm going to fast forward this a little bit forward. So be prepared to have these conversations.
I found out a lot of things there, which was interesting, but I wasn't really aware of my bias until after I graduated, and I spent some time with my uncle in Burkina Faso. And because I was staying longer than expected, I got some jobs while I was there. I was really horrible at all of them, each and every one of them.
There's the honesty.
The deal was that there were certain jobs that they had to hire Americans for, and there weren't that many Americans in Ouagadougou.
So
anyway, I found myself doing warehouse inventory for the Government Accounting Office. And that meant that at 20 years of age, I was sent on a minibus with a crew of around 5 working out day workers every day to this giant warehouse with no air conditioning. And I was supposed to write down all the inventory numbers on everything. And that was going okay until we came to the air conditioners.
Okay.
And the air conditioners were stacked in this enormous block that was higher than my head. It was like a house-sized block of boxes of air conditioners. And I looked at that and I thought, there is no way that I can see the numbers on all of those boxes, right? Because most of the numbers were facing inward and they were buried in this giant mountain. So, I looked at the guys and I tried to talk with them. I was learning French, and French was not their first language, so we kind of barely had a language in common. And as usual, they told me just to sit down and they take care of it, and they would call me when they needed me. And that's what they mostly did because, obviously they didn't really need my help.
Right.
So I sat there for a little while. I had no idea what they were doing. And after a while, they called me over. It's like, okay, we're ready for you now. And one guy crawled up on top of this house-sized block of air conditioners, and he was a tiny little guy. I mean, he was shorter than I was, maybe 100 pounds, probably 40, but looked 70. He had lost more than one finger to various accidents. And this guy, he crawled up on top, and he reached down his hand, and he just looked at me. And I just looked at him. I didn't take his hand. I just stood there and hesitated. Yeah, it was a tough moment. And then it got way worse because he looked at me with just this look of compassion.
And so just
to
clarify before you continue, Teresa, it was because the person that was reaching down to you was African. He was black.
He was black. He was male. He was different from me in every possible way.
Okay.
Every possible way. And I didn't know what he was planning for me, right?
Right.
So it wasn't just touching someone who was so different. It was also trusting myself to that person.
Right.
Trusting that you know what you're doing, and I'm going to go with whatever you have in mind. So there I was in my hesitation, and he looked with great compassion, and he said in French, he said, "I'm sorry, but if you want to come up, you're going to have to touch my hands."
Yeah. So that was a story from someone sharing a very difficult time, that she experienced at a very young age. And it's all the little things. One of the things that I've learned about this journey, as well as I'm learning of other journeys of going through health issues, is that, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And it's daily. It's not just something that, okay, you take a course and now you are done with it. You're constantly learning and constantly looking at your individual, where you are individually, just to try to get to that place of, well, how do I get beyond this? How do I get myself to a place where, I can feel and trust myself to engage in a conversation. And I wish I can tell you that it is easy to do, or there's just, well, you do these 1, 2, 3 things and you'll have it knocked out of the park and you'll be the expert and, you'll feel wonderful and everything's going to be great. It does require being committed to the process. And sometimes you need to take a break. And sometimes you do need to evaluate, well, why am I hearing these conversations around me and who am I surrounding myself with? And one of the reasons I do want to open up more into how do we get feedback and share your stories? Because I realize not everybody can take time off from work and even pre-record a show or pre-tape a show, or definitely come in or even call in during the time that the show is live on Thursdays from 5 to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so that's why I'm looking at, okay, how can we make this easier for you to access and to get your stories out, recognizing that it's still not going to be easy, that it's still going to be difficult. So I want to give you the email address again to email me at onehumannation@gmail.com. And what you're emailing at this particular point in time is the response to the question, if you're white, how would your life be different if you were born in this country as an African American? And then vice versa, if you were black and born in this country, how would your life have been different if you were born white? Again, you can email your response to onehumannation, WRUU, @gmail.com, and that is my email address here for the One Human Nation show. The other part, you can use that same email if you would like to pre-tape a show or be live on the show to share your stories of what you encountered in growing up in this country and discovering racism and how that impacted you. So your story may be a little bit longer than what the response would be to this question. And then on next week's show, on Thursday, I will be opening up the segment to accept the phone calls in. Of course, I will continue sharing information, but you'll have the opportunity to call in, and I will give you the phone number at that time. Now, and I will also post the phone number probably in the private group that's created. The reason why I'm not going to tell you the phone number now is because we're an all-volunteer station. So if you call in after 6 or at a different time when I'm not here during this live show, 9 times out of 10 you're not going to get an answer because the ringer is silenced, because that person is doing their show. So I just want to make that clear that you'll have the opportunity to call in during a specific period of time during the One Human Nation show. And as we wrap up today's show and get ready for the awesome Troy Stoner with Sound Limits, I do encourage you to continue on your journey, to listen, to connect with me. I will be uploading the recording for this show, so hopefully it gives you even more ideas and how to really get into what your role can be in 2019. As we get ready to prepare for Troy, I hope you all have a wonderful week. And I hope you can listen to Sound Limit because it's an awesome show also. And I'm looking forward to how we can have more of a connection in 2019.